Hey guys, it's Karen, my review for The Girl in the Spider's Web. And what The Girl in the Spider's Web is essentially about is it picks up a little bit after the events of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Lizbeth has gone on to become this vigilante of sorts, and there is also this other woman that is now working known as the Spider, and she is basically framing Lizbeth for a bunch of her work, and basically, we see that Michael Blomquist and a bunch of others, they have to try to defend her, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, The Girl in the Spider's Web, I really was not looking forward to this movie at all. Beyond the fact that, it has some really talented people in it and things like that, this just looked like one of the most unnecessary films of the entire year, but also one of the most disrespectful. I mean, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I think, is truly one of Fincher's best. I mean, every single film he does, I really do love from him, but that remake in particular is such a dark and gritty and just very raw adaptation of a classic rape revenge thriller. It really turns it on its head. It has, I think, the best work ever from Rooney Mara, and it was a perfect film that could have spawned a really great franchise, but unfortunately, the film was not financially successful. So you figure that they would just give up, right? Well, no, because Sony has to come in and be like, well, sure, people were not a fan of David Fincher, and maybe it wasn't a success financially, so what do? We're going to turn it into an action movie, and we're going to get a whole new cast and a new director on board, and we're still going to call it, the same franchise and everything, and it's exactly what I thought it is. The Girl in the Spider's Web is a extremely watered down and heavily sanitized version of the story that we know from the first movie, and is probably one of the most dull films of the entire year, but we're just getting right now, starting off with the cast. And I'll just say this right now, every single actor in this movie is really good. I think everyone is working the best with what they can do, and I was overall impressed by that. The best of the bunch definitely being from Claire Foy, who continues to show, I think, why she is slowly becoming one of the best actresses in Hollywood working today. I mean, she completely transforms herself into the role of Lizbeth, and I think really does elevate this character. You can tell the trauma that Lizbeth has been through, and, that she really does have this past, and the most that she's trying to overcome it, and how much she wants to go out of her way to help out people, and I thought she did a really good job in this role. Even at points where this film isn't working, I thought Foy's performance still was a highlight, and I really did like what she did here a lot. As far as everyone else goes, like I said, everyone else here is pretty good. Sever Knudsen, I think is how you pronounce his name. He does a good job for the most part as Michael Blomquist. It is a much blander version of the character, but that's really not his fault. For the most part, like I said, he does what he needs to do, and I was overall impressed by him. Lakeith Stanfield, of course, is good here. I mean, it's Lakeith Stanfield. I don't really, similar to Claire Foy, I don't really think he can give a bad performance, and what he has here, he's definitely really good. Played a much bigger role in the film than I expected, and I thought he definitely was really good. Sylvia Hoeks was really good here. Stephen Merchant, Vicky Krieps. I mean, really, the entire cast here does do a very solid job overall. But now we get to the directing and the writing, on the other hand, which that's where we get into the more problematic areas of this film. Now, I will say, Fede Alvarez is not the problem. He is trying to direct this film as best as he possibly can, and he does a fairly solid job. He approaches this as an action movie, and it is well directed in that sense. The film is not taking itself nearly as seriously as the other adaptations have. It is much more of an action movie, and it does work as that. And I thought he did enough where you can have fun with this movie. The problem is that this should not be a series that should be a fun movie. I should not be saying I'm having fun with a Girl in the Dragon Tattoo movie, because again, remember, the entire series is supposed to be a rape and revenge type thriller. It's supposed to be very dark and very serious, and the fact that this film is pretty much an action movie at this point, just really did not work for me, and that's especially, the case when it comes to the writing. I mean, look, the thing that this film really does not understand is what makes the character of Lisbeth Salander so great. Lisbeth Salander is not this badass vigilante that we love seeing punching people, and we love seeing, becoming completely invincible and coming out of things, completely okay. I mean, sure, she is hurt in this movie, but it is a much more like superhero type version of this character, and that's not what we want out of Lisbeth. The reason we like Lisbeth as much as we do is because we know the trauma that she's endured. We know exactly what she's gone through as a character, and we want to see her overcome it. And it's not like this film is ignoring that. I don't want to say it's ignoring it, because it definitely is there at points in the film. It's just kind of put more on the back burner to focus on a much more generic story that is honestly really hard to follow. And I'll get into that a little bit later, but the story itself, it's very generic, and it's nothing really that impressive compared to the other movies. And I think they could have focused a lot more on that. And I will say, what ends up going down, Lisbeth does have a personal connection to what's happening, but compared to everything else we've seen, it just does not feel like the same type of character. It doesn't feel like the same universe, and that really is my biggest problem with this movie, is that it's trying to be the sequel to the Fincher film when it is a completely separate universe altogether. I mean, the way the characters act in this movie are completely different from the way things were done in the Fincher one, and I kind of just wish this was the start of a different franchise, because it just feels really weird, especially if you were to do like a double feature from going to that one to this one. I mean, it's like night and day. They're two completely different films, and I just don't think it meshes well at all. But as I alluded to before, the story in this film as well is really confusing, and it shouldn't be, because it's a very simple story. But the problem with the movie is that there's so many characters and so many storylines we're trying to juggle, and the film never takes its time. The film never wants to put its focus on its characters. It's very plot driven, and it's trying to get to the next action sequence, and that's really all this film is concerned about. Besides Lisbeth, most of these characters, while there definitely is stuff to them, the film never really takes the time to zero in on them as characters. Take Lakeith Stanfield's character, for example. I enjoyed him in the film. I thought he definitely had some good stuff in the movie, but what was going on with this character? I couldn't tell you, because the film rushes so quickly through it that it really doesn't really give you a good explanation of like who this guy really is and why he is, doing what he's doing. And I think they could have done a much better job with that. And look, I'm going to sound very hypocritical, because I've said before that I like it when films, don't tell you everything and don't treat you like you're dumb. That's not the issue with this movie. The film, it's not that the film is, not telling you everything. I have no problem with that. It's just the film never takes its time in trying to give you any information as to what's going on. It expects that you know these characters, it expects you know this world, and it just kind of breezes through everything. And I think there was a horrible approach to this movie. It was definitely not the right way to handle this story at all. And again, there's so many characters going on that it really was hard for me to figure out what the plot was of this movie. I honestly struggled to come up with that plot synopsis, and what I told you is what I essentially did get out of it. And once the film goes on, it does get easier to tell what the story is, but again, just compared to the other movies, it's just not a very memorable story at all, and it really did disappoint me overall. It also, like I said, has way too many characters, especially Michael Blomkvist, who, aside from a plot in this movie where he is trying to go out of his way to help out Lisbeth because she's being framed for a bunch of stuff, really does not have much of a purpose in this movie, other than the fact that we expect his character to be here. And that as well was a big disappointment. Daniel Craig did so much with that character and was able to, elevate him and was able to make him so compelling, and all of that is just stripped away here, and that was definitely a big disappointment for me. I will say the third act, once it does get into it, it does get a little bit better in terms of the story for really everyone, but for the most part, he really does not have that big of a role in this film. So like I said, the writing for me, it's very all over the place. This film, I think, it should have been a lot more focused, and unfortunately, it's just not. In terms of cinematography, though, it is actually really good. That's one of the things that does elevate this film for me, is the cinematography. I think the cinematography here is very good. It still has a very good look to it. There are some really great action sequences in the film that I really did enjoy. There's some good, tracking shots and things like that. There's nothing particularly memorable, but it is very well shot, and the action sequences for the most part are really well done. But again, it just doesn't feel like the same type of movie. And, you know I should be able to just accept it as that. But the fact that they want to connect it to the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, I mean, that's really what is holding me back from even kind of recommending this to you guys. The score is really good. I enjoyed the score a lot. I think it definitely is a very memorable score for sure. I thought they did a very good job with that. And the editing, like I said, the editing to this film is really choppy. It's not as choppy as it could be, and I'm making it seem like the film is a bit of a clusterfuck, which it's really not necessarily a clusterfuck. It's just the story itself is very watered down, and it's very hard to tell what's going on because I don't think we got really enough of a focus on the characters. This should very much be a character study, and it's much more focused on the plot. And the plot itself is just not all that interesting, and the editing, while it's there, and while I do think the film is for the most part well paced, the film itself is extremely dull, and I just really was not all that into what was going on. But the third act, the film does move at a pretty brisk pace in the sense where if you're someone that enjoys action movies that are well paced and things like that, you may enjoy this one, but just, don't go into this thinking this is going to be another Girl with the Dragon Tattoo film, because that's really not what this is at all. Ultimately, this film did not piss me off as much as I expected it to, but it still doesn't justify its existence. It doesn't really do anything to make me think, okay, we really needed this film. It does have some things in there that I did overall appreciate, especially towards its third act. There are some really good scenes for sure that I did really enjoy, but just overall, it's a very frustrating watch because I just kind of wish it wasn't made. It feels kind of disrespectful to Fincher. It feels disrespectful to the people that even created these books, which I even heard that the book that this film is based on, I believe, was written way after the original author's death. So right from there, you can tell this is a completely different direction entirely, and I get what Sony's trying to do. I understand they want to make this into a franchise, but for something that's supposed to be so serious and so raw, I just don't think it works for this type of film. Claire Foy, all the acting is very strong here. Claire Foy, like I said, definitely being the best of the bunch for sure. But just overall, this film really did not do much to elevate it for me. It really did not do much for me at all. Not enough to piss me off, but it did do enough to it didn't do enough to justify its existence either. It's very forgettable, it's very dull, and it's really nothing that we need. It does have some good action sequences in there, but even after the fact, I still very much did forget a lot of what was going on in this film. It has a plot that I just thought was very confusing, and I just really was not into it at all. And I am going to give The Girl in the Spider's Web overall a C. I know it sounded like I hated this film a lot more than I did, but truthfully, it just really frustrated me because it just made me wish how much better this would have been if Fincher was more involved with it. And the fact that he wasn't, I think, was just a huge mistake on Sony's part, and I'm really hoping this is yet another failed franchise for them because I really don't want to see another film like this. I get what they're trying to do, but I just don't think it's a good idea with this type of series. But either way, guys, the most you guys saw The Girl in the Spider's Web overall. Love your thoughts in it. That's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.